I wanted to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about some of the materials that I use on a daily basis. To start out with, I have a glass palette that I use. It's basically a 1/4 inch thick piece of glass that I've gotten cut to 20 inches by 26 inches is this particular size, but you can get it cut to any size that you like. I would suggest getting the largest size possible as far as a palette size goes. That way you have more mixing surface to use, and it's also it'll save you time later because you won't have to keep scraping the paint off in order to provide room to mix more colors. So a larger surface I think works out best. And it's easy to clean this glass off, which is another reason why I like to use it. You just take a paint scraper, which is one of these guys right here, that you can get at a hardware store as well. And basically, when you're ready to clean off your palette, or you need another section of the palette to be able to use, you just take it, scrape off the paint, wipe your paint scraper off with a paper towel, and continue again just until you clear off an area that you need, or clear off the entire palette altogether. So the glass palette is definitely much easier to use, I think, than having to clean off a wooden palette all the time as well. But like I said, it's up to you though. It's personal preference. These are some of the things that have helped me over the years, and whatever works for you. But I would definitely recommend a glass palette. I think it works well. Also, you'll notice that the palette the palette itself is not white, but I have a piece of foam board underneath the palette itself. It's a white piece of foam board. The reason I have it white is because I like to work on a white canvas when I start out with. I don't really tone the canvas a whole lot as far as toning the entire canvas. So I like to work start out on a white canvas, and I just find it's easier to mix the colors on a white palette itself. If you're used to working on a toned canvas, then you might feel more comfortable with either a gray piece of paper or a gray piece of foam board underneath, or more of a neutral color or a darker value. It all depends on what works for you and what type of subject you're painting. But again, this is a glass palette with a piece of white foam board underneath. Then I also have some palette knives that I use on a daily basis as well. I actually have an entire container full of different palette knives, but these are the three that I keep coming back to and that I use probably most often. The first one is a mixing palette knife, and basically this is what I do all of my paint mixtures with. I like it because it has a large head on it, so you can mix a large amount of paint. Also, it has a trowel shape on it, which helps. That way, instead of, some of them are just straight and flat, but I like the troweled handle because it's easier to get the paint off and to be able to manipulate it more. The next one is pretty much like the one I just showed you, except it's a smaller version. And I don't use this for mixing paint, but I do use it for actually painting on canvas. So a lot of times I'll take the small one, I'll get a paint mixture, and I'll go in on a certain area of a painting. If I want a sharp edge, I'll line this edge up and drag it down, or if I want a broken edge, I'll sometimes drag it up. There are different things that you can do with this palette knife. And the small size really helps to get into detailed areas that you're looking for a little more solidity to the paint, rather than trying to go in and move the brush around and actually mixing the paint together. The palette knife has a way of laying the paint on in a way that a brush can't. So I like to use that one as well. Also, I'll mention this as well, I don't use this for mixing just for the fact that it's so small. If you try to mix a color, and you take a color and you put it down, you start to mix colors together, you'll notice that you can only, with something this size, you can only mix a very small section at a time. Whereas when you're painting, I find it easier to mix larger amounts of paint right off the bat. That way you don't have to go back and constantly be remixing those same colors. but instead you can just dip into those as you go along. This last one here is one that I discovered a few years ago that I think it's great as far as if you're wanting a broken edge or a look that's more accidental, especially when it comes to painting foliage or trees, anything like that where you want sort of a broken and accidental look to your edges. This is a great one to use. And then as far as brushes go, I'm not I don't hold to just one brush manufacturer. I use a variety of brushes, and I always like to try out new brushes, whether they're bristle brushes or synthetics. And so what I have here, just a variety. Basically, the style of brush that I use are flats, either flats or filberts. But a lot of times the filberts, actually the flat brushes will turn into filberts. Because basically I'll take these brushes, and I've used them so much that instead of being flat here, they start to taper on the edges, and they actually form more of a filbert. So I usually end up turning my flat brushes into filberts because I'm pretty rough on my brushes when I paint. These are just some examples of some synthetic brushes. They're softer. I use them for blending a lot of times, and my brushes, I'll use them even when they become almost like little cotton balls or puff balls on the end. Basically, I've worn them down so much that there's really not a very sharp edge at all, but it's still a useful brush. And I'll basically use a brush until it falls apart, which I've done before many times, and then just smaller brushes. The only thing that I would recommend in as far as brush sizes is what I like to use is the even sizes. They come in all different sizes from 0 to on up. And what I usually do is get either even numbers or odd numbers, usually even numbers, a size 2, size 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, somewhere in there. But usually when it comes to painting portraits, a lot of times I find that I use this size quite a bit, which this is a 12, and then an 8 and under. And then to block in larger areas, I'll use a bristle brush. This is a hog bristle. It's a little bit stiffer. You're able to scrub it around a little bit more. But whatever works best for you, give them a try and try out a bunch of different styles, a bunch of different manufacturers. The canvas that I like to use is actually, it's linen. And the canvas that I like to use is Claessens or Claessens, however you'd like to say it, number 13, single primed linen. And basically, it's a very fine weave. The thread count is very high, which means that you don't get a lot of blemishes in the canvas itself, but it's a very smooth, even texture. And that's what I like to use when it comes to portraits, because I don't want a really bumpy canvas that might have blemishes or bumps in it. So when you're painting a portrait, you don't want a bump somewhere in the face, an unwanted bump somewhere in the face. So this canvas has worked really well for me, and I highly recommend it. They do a great job. It's all oil primed as well, and it's just a great surface to work on. As far as colors go, I'll point out some of the colors that I use here. These are all Winsor Newton professional grade oil paint here. And what I have to start out with is titanium white. I have raw sienna, gold ochre, cadmium yellow pale, cadmium yellow, cadmium orange, cadmium scarlet, cadmium red, cadmium red deep, permanent alizarin crimson, cadmium green pale, permanent sap green, Prussian green, viridian, manganese blue, and French ultramarine blue. You don't necessarily need all of these colors on your palette. A lot of these are what I would call convenience colors, meaning that you could mix these colors on your own, but instead of going back and mixing each one of these colors every single time I want to paint, it's just easier to have them already mixed on your palette, so that way you can just go ahead and start dipping into those. And so what I've done is I've arranged my palette from warm to cool. So basically the warmer colors are on this side, the cooler colors are over here. But in addition to having the warm side and the cool side, basically I also have a warm and a cool version of each color within a family. So basically I have a warmer yellow and a cooler yellow. I have a warmer orange, and this is Cad Scarlet. I'm not sure if it picks it up on the camera or not, but it's actually in between an orange and a Cad Red, so it's a little deeper orange, I would say. I wouldn't call it a red. So a warmer and a cooler version of an orange. And then as far as the reds go, I have a warm red, cool red, and then a really cool red with that alizarin crimson. Same thing with the greens. This strange color here, a lot of times people ask me, well, where do you use that cadmium green pale color? And it comes in handy when you're painting some areas of the flesh tones. Also, if you're doing a lot of blonde hair, you can mix it with some of this raw sienna as well, with a little bit of white, and it produces, and sometimes with a little bit of the gold ochre, and it produces a nice color that works well with blonde hair. You don't use it, at least I don't use it just as it is, straight out of the tube, but a lot of times I'm using some sort of a version of it, as far as a grade down or a downplayed version of it, by mixing a complement into it or something to kind of knock down the power of that color. Sap Green, they have a Sap Green and a permanent Sap Green. If for whatever reason, I would always get the color that's more permanent, just for the fact that I'm painting commission portraits and they're for a client, so they need to last for quite a long time. And so I'm always trying to go for the most permanent paint that I can get, which is something to consider also if you're going to be doing commissioned work or gallery work or any type of work where you're trying to ensure permanence. I would definitely look at the ratings on each of the paints and each of the colors that you use as well, to make sure that they're the most permanent possible. This color here is sort of in between a Viridian and a Sap Green. It's called Prussian Green. It doesn't have as much tinting strength. And what I mean by tinting strength is that when you mix white, mix it to another color, if you added white to this, it would take quite a bit to keep it, to change the color to a darker value, whereas Viridian changes the color pretty quickly. But it's a nice in-between version, in between color. As far as a green goes, it's more of a grayish green. It's beautiful when you mix it with flesh tones as a graying agent, which I'll talk about in just a little bit here. And then there's also the blues here. I have a warm version of a blue and a cool version of a blue. The reason I say it's a warmer blue and a cooler blue is because the warmer blue, which is manganese blue right here, it leans more towards the warmer side, so it's going to contain more yellow in it. It's just a warmer version. When I first started looking at colors as far as temperature goes, whether it's warm or cool, it takes a little getting used to be able to train your eye to actually recognize what is warm and what's cool. But everything is in relation to what's right next to it. And so that's why I would consider the manganese blue a warmer blue and the French ultramarine a cooler blue. But those are basically the materials that I'll be using throughout this painting. And one more thing before I go here, I wanted to also mention setting up your palette. As I set my palette up, as far as paints go, I set the paints up the exact same way every single time that I paint. the reason I do that, they're always in the same order, they're always in the same position. The reason I do that is because it's much easier for me to find colors as I'm starting to paint, and as I'm mixing colors, I know exactly where to go in order to find the color that I'm looking for. And the more organization you have on your palette, as far as setting up your palette the same way every time, I think is better in the long run, because it becomes more intuitive as you're painting, instead of having to think about, okay, well, where's that cadmium scarlet that I'm looking for? Instead of having to stop your train of thought and to start thinking about, well, where is it on the palette? I automatically know, okay, boom, it's right here, so that's where I need to go. Or boom, over here for a green. I already know where I need to go as far as the position on the palette. And I think it saves a lot of time later on as you're working. So just something to think about, and you don't have to set it up. Obviously, every artist is different, and so they set their palette up differently. They might have the cools over here, the warms over there. But keep this in mind. Your palette is not just laying out colors. Your palette is actually an extension of your way of thinking. So some artists like the cool colors over here. Some artists like the cool colors over here. Some artists don't have a set organization as far as going from warm to cool. They'll mix them, they'll lay them out on the palette differently. Each artist is different, they think differently, and so their palette is set up differently. But no matter how you set up your palette, the important thing is to set it up the same way every time. That way you get used to the layout and you know exactly where to go when it comes to mixing.